You guys won't let it go, will ya? Jersey Devil, Jersey Devil, Jersey Devil. Well, today I'm done dodging. I'm answering your call with a full-on plunge into the haunted heart of New Jersey's Pine Barrens. 1.1 million acres of sandy, untamed wilderness where something strange has been lurking for centuries. So buckle up, Buttercup, because we're hunting the Jersey Devil. And trust me, this thing's got claws. Literally. New Jersey, the most densely populated state in the Union. Weird piece of trivia, I know, but what makes it kind of amazing is that it's the most densely populated state, even though about 22% of the land, a full 1.1 million acres, is a very sparsely populated area called the Pineland Park Reserve, more popularly known as the Pine Barrens. Why is it called the Pine Barrens? Well, the soil there is really sandy, called sugar sand by the locals. So when the early European settlers came trooping in the 17th century, they found out pretty fast that the sugar sand was no good for growing any food. However, do not let the name fool you. The Pine Barrens are anything but barren, with around 400 animal species and over 800 different plants, all calling that barren area their home. Of course, not all of those settlers left for greener pastures. Some stuck around, growing into a resilient, self-sufficient community now known as Pineys. Today's Pineys are very proud of and work hard to maintain their heritage, culture, and tight-knit community. That heritage includes centuries of folklore. And trust me, after that long, they've managed to collect a lot of it. Many a local campfire goer has been regaled by the stories of legends, such as those of Captain Kidd, who buried a treasure in Bernegate Bay and comes back on occasion to visit it, sometimes with, sometimes without his head. Stories of the Black Dog of the Barrens, not a black shuck or dogman kind of entity, but instead a harmless, unfortunate victim of a ship attack. There's the golden-haired girl who stares out at the sea in her white dress, still waiting for the return of her lover. There's the white stag, known to not only help people lost in the vast expanse of the Barrens, but also to prevent disasters. Its most famous appearance was as a roadblock to a passing stagecoach, who, unbeknownst to them, was barreling right toward a bridge that had been washed out. But without a doubt, the most legendary character of all Pine Barren folklore is the Jersey Devil. And while he's done a pretty good job of making a name for himself and becoming a master of marketing, to the Pineys, this legend is no joke. The Jersey Devil is a real creature and a dangerous one at that. Once you hear some of the stories I have of this elusive beast, you just might agree. For those of you who have never had the pleasure of hearing of this creature before today, the Jersey Devil, also known as the Leeds Devil or the Devil of Leeds, is a flying monstrosity with a head like a horse, a long neck, bat-like wings, thin bird-like legs, hooves for feet, and a reptilian forked tail. On those occasions that he does land, he walks on two legs, leaving behind hoof prints. This thing is like the Frankenstein of the cryptid world. And he actually has his own origin story. Well, more like an origin stew. Over the last 290 years, a few of the details have gotten a bit murky. Not a surprise with the 3-century-old game of Operator, but here's the gist of the legend. It is 1735, and a woman by the name of Mother Leeds is living with her husband and 12 children somewhere around Leeds Point. Her husband is not the greatest guy, but he's somehow barely managing to feed the 12 kids that they have. That does not mean, however, that she wants a 13th. So when she sees those 2 pink lines for the 13th time, she goes a little nuts and mutters something to the effect of, "Let this one be a devil." For the life of me, I cannot make sense of that quote. A few months later, on a dark and stormy night, of course, she and the midwives in one room, and her husband and all the kids in the other. Delivery goes fine, and she gives birth to a beautiful baby boy. At least that's how he comes out. But he doesn't stay that way for long. Within minutes, the curse that she had uttered all those weeks ago, and that she had long forgotten, comes home to roost, so to speak. The baby starts to change, transforming right in her arms. It starts growing at an incredible speed, sprouting horns on its head, and claws like talons pop out of the end of his fingers. Leathery wings grow from his back, and hair and feathers sprout all over his body. And his eyes begin to glow red. This thing is hideous. As he grows larger and larger, he looks around and can read the look of horror on every face he sees. He brutally attacks his mom, killing her, then goes after anyone else still standing in the room, ripping them limb from limb, either killing or maiming all of them. Once he's finished in there, he goes into the other room and wreaks havoc in there as well. Those who are lucky enough to survive the onslaught witness the beast, then run to the chimney, which he's too big for, fly out, pretty much destroying the chimney and leaving a pile of rubble in his wake. The monster flies off into the darkness and presumably finds himself a nice little place to hunker down in the Barrens, where he lives to this day, terrorizing anyone unlucky enough to cross his path. That must have been a good amount of people, because by the time he's 5 years old, in 1740, a priest actually performs an exorcism on the forest to try to rid them all of this nightmare. Now, as if the idea of exorcising a forest isn't strange enough, the exorcism has an expiration date. It's only good for 100 years. And amazingly enough, it seems to work. Outside of the occasional sighting here and there, things in the forest seem to settle down quite a bit for the next century. Although, two of the most famous older accounts happen before that 100-year time frame is up, and almost right on top of each other. The first one happens around 1819 and is actually a bigger deal than just a sighting. Legend says that President James Monroe commissioned an unofficial, months-long hunt for the Jersey Devil that included one Dr. James Killian, a 19th century cryptid hunter and paranormalist, and Commodore Stephen Decatur, a Navy guy known for his heroism in the Barbary Wars. The story goes that Decatur is on a cannonball testing grounds when the Jersey Devil is spotted flying right over the firing range. Decatur shoots a cannonball right at it, hits it, but it does nothing to the beast. He just flies off into the sunset. The second of the more notable sightings happened roughly a year later, around 1820, to Joseph Bonaparte, brother of Napoleon Bonaparte. Joseph scrambled his way to America after his and his brother's little endeavors in Europe didn't pan out so well, and took up residence at an estate called Point Breeze near Bordentown. Rumor has it that Joseph is out on his estate hunting when he starts following some tracks in the snow that look like hoof prints. But then they just stop, like something just took off in the air. As he's studying the prints, he hears a hissing noise behind him and turns around to see a large animal with two crane-looking legs, bat-like wings, and a face like either a horse or a camel. Joseph freaks out, tells his friends what he saw, and they're like, "Yup, that's the Devil of Leeds." And just a little tangent coincidence, his estate at Point Breeze burns down that very same year. I'm sure they're totally unrelated. Since then, the creature has continued to make itself known throughout the Pine Barrens and sometimes even beyond, with more people reporting hearing its otherworldly cries from deep in the forest than actually seeing it. Now, I get that particular story might be a little tough for some to swallow. However, there are actually documented events in history that can be stitched together to create a more factually based understanding of how this legend may have been born. Remember I said that the Jersey Devil is also known as the Leeds Devil or the Devil of Leeds? Well, that is basically what everyone called it until the 20th century. So the question becomes, what exactly is the name Leeds referring to? Every single person in southern New Jersey is rolling their eyes right now because everybody in that neck of the woods knows the Leeds family. There are Leeds family members in the Pine Barrens to this day. So who are they? It all starts with Daniel Leeds. He's a royal surveyor for the British Crown who acquires some land in the Egg Harbor area of the then province of New Jersey, which has since become known as Leeds Point, on the eastern edge of the Pine Barrens forest and prime Jersey Devil encounter territory. Daniel had several children, and two sons in particular, Titan and Japhet, are going to come into play in just a bit. So close your eyes and take yourself back to history class for a moment. Remember that the 17th century flood of people from Europe were mostly Quakers looking for a place far from the king so they could practice their religion in peace. Very devout people. And of course, as the years roll on, the idea of being under the king's thumb starts getting less and less popular. That's strike one for Daniel, who's not only an employee of the crown, but loyal to it as well. Not so popular in the Quaker ranks. But then, evidently, the surveying business was drying up or something because around 1687, he starts publishing an almanac. Okay, except his almanac contains astrological symbols and writings that immediately raise the red flag of evil with his Quaker community, who collect and burn as many of the almanacs as they can. And keep in mind that around this same time in American history, 1692 and 1693, the Salem witch trials were taking place just up north in Massachusetts. The Quakers took their fear of evil very seriously. But that doesn't stop old Daniel. He keeps publishing them and doubles down with even more information on astrology and mysticism, and even starting getting into demonology and angelology, just to name a few. This did not sit well with his people, who blasted him in the public square as a heretic. The fighting continues, and Daniel is eventually kicked out of the Quakers and converts to Anglicanism. Then starts blasting back with accusations that the Quakers are anti-monarchists, which, let's be honest, they probably were. In any event, the Quakers end up publishing another retaliatory attack on Daniel, publicly accusing him of working for the devil. So here we have the Leeds name linked with the devil. Then in 1716, Daniel's son Titan inherits his dad's almanac business and finds himself going head to head with another almanac, Poor Richard's Almanac, written by none other than Benjamin Franklin. The competition between the two intensifies over the years until 1733, Benjamin Franklin starts making fun of the astrological content of the Leeds Almanac and publishes his edition using a satirical version of Titan's astrology to predict Titan's death for October of that same year. Titan doesn't think it's very funny and calls Ben a fool and a liar. Ben fires back with a published response openly mocking Titan, suggesting that the prediction did come true and that Titan is now writing as a ghost. A taunt that Ben would continue to use until well after Titan's real death in 1738. So now you have one Leeds who works with the devil and another Leeds who's a ghost. Add to all of that, in 1728, Titan starts using the family crest on the covers of his almanac. The family crest just happens to be a wyvern, which is a dragon-like creature with bat-like wings and clawed feet. Who does that remind you of? Now let's talk about Daniel's other son, Japhet. He lives in Leeds Point and is married twice, with both women passing away, but giving him 3 sons. So hey, third time's a charm, right? Japhet goes out, finds a third wife, Deborah, who bears him 9 more children. That's 12 total. Then Japhet gets a will together that includes all 12 children. What makes the will interesting is that it is dated 1736, so not long after the legendary 1735 birth of the 13th demon child. Is it possible that Japhet had a come-to-Jesus moment standing face-to-face with a demon ransacking his house and decided it's never too early to get your affairs in order? So, when you put all of this together, the Leeds lived in the same area, Jersey Devil Ground Zero. The community hated Daniel and thought he was in league with Satan, pretty much calling him the Leeds Devil to his face. The family crest is a dragon that's very similar to descriptions of the Jersey Devil. You have the Mother Leeds part of the legend in Japhet and Deborah and their 12 children. All of the elements to the folklore are there. Call somebody a monster long enough and then add in the proverbial game of operator over the next couple of generations, you have yourself the birth of a legend. Now, with all of that historical fact backing up a very plausible beginning to a 300-year-old legend, it's still missing one thing. If this whole affair was started by a cranky old religious nut with lots of grandchildren, then what exactly have people been seeing in the woods this whole time? Encounters with this beast have been recorded over this entire span of time. They may have lulled during the 100-year exorcism, but they're still there. In 1859, the Atlantic Monthly published a story about stories told by the Pine Barren residents. In 1887, a newspaper reported sightings of a winged creature spotted around the same area, with one man quoted as saying,
"That thing is not a bird nor an animal, but it is the Leeds Devil. I can remember well when it was roaming around in Evesham Woods 50 years ago, and when it was hunted by men and dogs and shot at by the best marksmen there were in all South Jersey, but could not be killed."
But nothing in the annals of Jersey lore holds a candle to the sightings of 1909, when, during the span of 6 days, thousands of people are estimated to have gotten a glimpse of the monster. According to Dave Giuliano of theshadowlands.net, everything starts in the pre-dawn morning of Sunday, January 16th, 1909, in Woodbury, New Jersey, when Thack Cousins sees a something flying above him with glowing eyes. Whatever it is, it then heads over to nearby Bristol, Pennsylvania, where John McGowan is walking on the banks of the canal and sees something flying through the air and hears its ear-piercing scream. The Bristol postmaster, E.W. Minister, hears the screaming too and sees a flying creature well enough to describe its head as looking like a horse's head. A police officer, James Sackville, even takes a shot at it as it flies away. When the sun finally comes up, there are hoof prints all over Bristol, with 2 local trappers saying they've never seen tracks like that before. The next day, it makes its way to Burlington, New Jersey, with more prints all over town in almost every yard. The prints go everywhere, like up trees, from one roof to another, and into open fields where they just stop. The same things are reported in Columbus, Heading, Kincora, and Rancocas. Posses are formed, tracking dogs are loosed. And guess what? The dogs refuse to track it. Where have I heard that before? And if you're thinking this sounds an awful lot like the devil's footprints in England in 1855, you're right. If you want to see that video, there's a link in the description to our episode of that freakiness. Early Tuesday morning, Mr. and Mrs. Nelson Evans of Gloucester are treated to the longest of all the sightings. They're woken up about 2:30 a.m. by a strange noise in their yard. They look out the window to see some creature just hanging out. They watched it for like 10 minutes.
It was about 3 feet and half high, with a head like a collie dog and a face like a horse. It had a long neck, wings about 2 feet long, and its back legs were like those of a crane, and it had horse's hoofs. It walked on its back legs and held up 2 short front legs with paws on them. It didn't use the front legs at all while we were watching. My wife and I were scared, I tell you, but I managed to open the window and say, shoo, and it turned around, barked at me, and flew away.
That afternoon, 2 professional hunters in Gloucester follow tracks for 20 miles that go over 5-foot fences and under spaces only 8 inches tall, and it's seen by a whole group of people in Camden. The next day, so Wednesday, it's back in Burlington with a police officer and Reverend John Purcell getting a good look, and the good Reverend saying, "Never saw anything like it before." Posses in Haddonfield follow tracks that just stop. And in Collingswood, a posse watches it fly off toward Moorestown, where it is seen by John Smith near the Mount Carmel Cemetery. Right after that, it's seen by George Snyder, who describes it exactly the same way John Smith did. Not to mention that more tracks are found in Riverside. On Thursday, it makes an appearance at the Black Hawk Social Club. I assume that to mean at least a few people. Then it circles the sky over an entire trolley car full of people in Clementon, with their descriptions matching everyone else's so far. The beast then makes its way to Trenton, where Councilman E.P. Whedon hears the sound of wings flapping. He opens his door to see what's going on and sees hoof prints in his yard. Hoof prints that are also seen elsewhere in the city. By the end of the day, trolley drivers in Trenton and Brunswick are packing heat.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Just in case. The people of Pittman head to the churches. Chickens everywhere are either missing or dead, and the West Collingswood Fire Department actually shoots at it with a hose, which I don't think it really appreciated because it circled back to dive bomb them before flying off. Thursday night, Mrs. Sorbinski, who lives in Camden, hears a racket in her yard. She opens the door to see this creature trying to make off with her dog. She starts screaming, grabs her broom, and runs at the monster, smacking it over and over until it lets the dog go. Over 100 people crowd into her yard after hearing the commotion, including the police. The crowd hears an unfamiliar screeching coming from an area called Kagan Hill. They all start running in that direction, see the creature, and the police start shooting at it. The devil takes off and flies away, and not a soul is seen on the streets of Camden for the rest of the night. By Friday, schools, mills, and factories are closing because everyone's too afraid to leave their houses to go anywhere. A Camden police officer spies the creature drinking from a horse's trough. Jacob Henderson of Salem sees it, describing it as having wings and a tail. And a Blackwood police officer sees it and draws a sketch of it. His sketch matches all the other descriptions so far. But after Friday, the sightings stop as fast as they had started. One more sighting is reported in February, but that's it for 1909. But should be no surprise that an event like this is bound to draw out that guy. One guy later confessed to hoaxing some of the hoof prints. But the real hoaxers were Norman Jeffries and T.F. Hopkins from the Arch Street Museum in Philadelphia. The museum was kind of like a Ripley's Believe It or Not place with various oddities and curiosities on display. Mr. Hopkins, the museum owner, tells Norman, the museum publicist, that they're about to go under if Norman can't drum up some business. So Norman and his animal trainer friend Jacob Hope get their hands on a kangaroo from a circus, paint green stripes on it, glue some huge claws on it, glue wings on its back, and proclaim to the world through fake stories to the newspapers that they had caught the beast and now have it on display at the museum. Sadly for them, it only prevents the closing of the museum by a few weeks. And 20 years later, Norman confesses to the hoax. Now, obviously, it will come as no surprise that there are people out there who believe that all of the sightings are merely misidentified forest animals like bats, a great horned owl, or a sandhill crane. Sandhill cranes are becoming the swamp gas excuse of the cryptid world. But the sightings continue. In 1925, a guy grabs his gun and takes off after something that's attacking his chickens. He shoots it, kills it, has no idea what it is, so he takes some pictures. He shows the pictures to at least 100 people, but no one has a clue what it is. In 1951, a group of boys are out in the woods around Gibbstown and spot a winged, hooved creature with bat-like wings and a horse or goat-like head and a forked tail. This sighting is part of what is called the Gibbstown invasion, which is a rash of sightings that happened all around Gibbstown in 1951. And even more recent is a terrifying encounter from January of 2004. Lori Winkleman, her husband Glenn, and their 3 kids live near Wharton State Park in the middle of the Pine Barrens. She and her kids are out playing in the snow from the first real storm of the season. They start to go inside for dinner, but Lori sees there are still Christmas lights on the garage. The Pine Barrens at night always kind of creep her out, so she asks her 11-year-old son to go with her while she walks over to the garage to turn the lights off. As she's bending over to pull the plug, she hears her son start making a weird noise. She looks at her son and sees his face is frozen in a wide-eyed stare as he points to the trees. Following his finger, Lori looks at the trees and sees a giant black thing perched in the trees. As she's looking and trying to figure out what it is that she's seeing, the thing takes to the air headed in their direction. Lori snaps into action and pushes her still frozen son toward the house as the two take off running at top speed. They feel a whoosh sensation over their heads and then hear it land on the roof of the house. They keep running for the door, even though they know this thing is now in front of them. And as they get closer, they can hear the click-clack sounds as it moves down the roof closer to the door. Lori and her son hit the door, throw themselves inside, and have simultaneous meltdowns. The next morning, Glenn wakes her up, saying, "Oh my God, you gotta see this." They go outside, look up on the roof, and there are footprints right where Lori said they would be. It had stopped snowing, and there wasn't really any wind, so the tracks are in perfect condition. Glenn takes pictures of the tracks. They take the pictures to a friend of theirs who's an expert hunter. He has no idea. They take him to a wildlife expert at their local park and rec department. He has no clue. So finally, Lori calls the police. An officer comes out, conducts a perimeter search, looks at the tracks on the roof, has no idea what made them, but estimates whatever it is to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 and 400 pounds. He asks Lori if they have guns in the house. Lori says no. And the officer tells her, maybe you should get some. Chris Differ, author of the book Jersey Devil Update 2022, More Stories of New Jersey's Enduring Legend, is keeping tabs on some of the more recent sightings as they are reported to him, including this one shared with him by a guy named Joe Brick. It's early January, 1 a.m., as Joe steps off the train in an Iron Maiden t-shirt, skinny jeans, and his well-worn leather jacket. He's just getting back from a concert in Philadelphia. He'd had a pretty good time at the concert, but by the time the cold air hits his face, he can feel that most of his buzz is gone. As he braces against the cold and heads for the stairs, he sees this massive figure standing on the other side of the tracks. Joe looks at it and gets the feeling it's looking back at him, but it's silhouetted by the streetlight behind it, so he can't really see it all that clearly. What he can see gives him the distinct impression that it's not human. It has skinny legs from the knees down and overly broad shoulders. But Joe keeps moving. He gets down from the platform and onto Main Street. As he's walking, he can hear footsteps behind him. Except they're not really footsteps. It sounds more like hooves clomping. He hears what sounds like wings flapping and just starts running, knowing in his gut this is the Jersey Devil. Joe turns right and heads down an alley. Whatever this thing is, it follows him into the alley, but its wing hits the side of the brick building, causing it to go down. Joe keeps running through the alley across the street and ends up on the front steps of a theater. He tries to get in, but the doors are locked. Having nowhere else to go and seeing this creature getting closer, he just keeps shaking the doors. Suddenly, the doors open and Joe throws himself inside past the two actors dressed in togas, evidently staying late for a little extra rehearsal time. As they try to recover from the surprise of Joe barging in on them, they look out beyond him and they too see the beast flying at them before Joe quickly pulls the door shut behind them. All three of them stay holed up in the theater for at least a half an hour, with the girl, a young 20s blonde girl, kind of laughing but shaking at the same time. They talk about it and all agree that they all saw the same thing, like, we saw that, right? Once they figure they've waited long enough for the creature to vacate the area, the young man starts his car with his remote starter, and the two make a run for it into his car, as Joe makes his way back to Main Street, looking all around as he goes. By this time, it's like 1:30, 1:45, and as he's walking, something at an old bank building catches his attention. It's the thing, just standing there. To Joe's horror, he watches as the creature stretches its wings and takes to the air again, heading right at him. He starts running again, looking for another alley or someplace to hide, when the thing swoops right over Joe's head and sinks its claws into Joe's shoulders. Joe feels the ground fall away from under him as the thing carries him higher and higher. His fight or flight kicks in and he starts to wiggle as much as he can and manages to wiggle himself out of his jacket, falls, landing on a roof, rolling down over the gutter and onto a car. The car's alarm goes off and both Joe and the thing clear the area at high speed. As he's running, Joe can feel blood running down his arm from a gash he got from the gutter, but he just keeps running. He makes it to the 7-Eleven and runs into the couple from the theater who are just coming out, munchies in hand. I don't think there's a whole lot of people on the streets of Hamilton at 2 a.m. on a weeknight. Joe piles into the back of their car. They're a little startled, but they look at Joe and he's got blood running down his arms and roof shingle grit all over. And the girl's like, "What happened to your jacket?" Joe tells her, "I wiggled out of it when the Jersey Devil was carrying me away." Whether they believe him or not, they can tell he's pretty beat up and just looks like someone who needs a ride home. Today, Joe doesn't get off the train by himself anymore and has severely cut down his nighttime activity attendance. Has a brand new 2.5-inch scar on his arm as a permanent souvenir and still really misses that jacket. But lest you think that there is no place that the Jersey Devil can't get you, I leave you with this piece of wisdom from Paul Evans Peterson Jr., author of the book The Legendary Pine Barrens, New Tales from Old Haunts. According to Paul, if you find some Jersey Devil hoof prints, take a little shovel, carefully dig out that track, put it into a glass jar, put the lid on the jar, and keep the jar under your bed. As long as you keep that track under your bed, the Jersey Devil will never hurt you. I'm going to leave you with a little piece of trivia today, which is that New Jersey is the only state in the country to have an official demon after voting in 1939 to have the Jersey Devil hold that honor for their state. And by the way, how did Chris Differ end his book on modern Jersey Devil sightings? With the words, "Be careful out there. My brother from another mother." If you want to leap right into another cryptid adventure, click right here. Be careful out there. And I will see you here again on the InBetween.